Hello, welcome to another class on fortifying your faith in a time of deconstruction. Deconstruction, a time of deconversion. You know, the attacks by the new atheists, the attacks by skeptics upon Christianity have left some with a faith that has been shaken, and some have actually walked away from their faith because of these attacks by critics. And so I'm here to try to build you up, to strengthen you, so if you come under fire by some of these critics, you won't be shaken. Your faith can be strong. I mean, some of the accusations they make are pretty amazing. Last week I talked about Richard Dawkins, one of the new atheists, and in his book, The God Delusion, he says the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynist, homophobic, racist, infantile, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniac, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. That's a mouthful there. He says that's the God of the Old Testament. He's a terrible person. Look at this guy. And unfortunately, some people have read his accusations and have had their faith shaken by that. We had a man who had been influenced by Dawkins and others who unfortunately had some access to some of our teenagers. And one of them left the church. And he said that the Bible didn't reach his level of morality. I mean, the idea that God is immoral, that he would do these things is just a terrible accusation. And here's a point to remember. Don't allow the new atheists, skeptics, doubters to teach you the Bible, because usually they get it wrong. And in contrast to that, what you should do is know how to read your Bible. Know how to read your Bible. Be able to study for yourself. That is the best way for you to fortify your faith. But one of the accusations they make against God is that God, he was genocidal in the Old Testament. That his attack on the Canaanite was an ethnic cleansing. That he wanted to destroy all the Canaanites and totally have violence against these defenseless religious and ethnic groups. God is some sort of a cosmic Adolf Hitler. That's their accusation. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And what you have to know is the context and the literary styles of the Old Testament to be able to understand what's being said here. Now, the context is the Canaanites. They were sinful people. They had detestable practices. If you would hear of what they were accused of, it would just make your skin crawl. I mean, they were terrible, horrible people. And we'll talk about this in just a moment. But in Genesis, the 15th chapter, when God comes to Abraham, he says to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. And then verse 16, "Then in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete." They're going to go away, but they're going to come back here to the promised land. I'm going to give them this land because the time of the Amorite is not yet complete. They haven't come to the fullness of their sins, but there is going to be a day of judgment, God is saying to them. And so we have these accusations against the Canaanites, and there's a day of judgment coming. In fact, in Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter, he says, "But you shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord your God." You're going to utterly destroy these Canaanite peoples, and it's going to have a twofold effect. One is judgment, And the second is going to be to provide for you the promised land. And so we can read about what God says that for them to do. Exodus 23, verses 20 through 33. I'm not going to read these passages today. I'm just going to mention them. Exodus 34, verses 11 through 16. Numbers 33, verses 50 through 56. Tells them to drive out the Canaanite. Not to exterminate them, but to drive them out and destroy all of their idols. And then in Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 5, he tells them, I want you to utterly destroy them. Don't intermarry with them. And destroy all of their idols. And so that was what they were to do. Now, in Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter, he tells them how to go about this. In verse 10, he says, when you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer terms of peace. So you have to offer them a term of peace, that maybe they don't want to fight. And this happened in Joshua's conquest of Canaan, by the way. In Joshua, the 11th chapter, verse 19, it says that there was not a city which made peace with the sons of Israel except the Hivites living in Gibeon. They took them all in battle. So none of the cities would accept these peace offers except for the one, the Hivites in Gibeon. And so they were to offer peace treaty. They offered peace agreement with them, and they offered that, but they didn't take it. Next, in verse 14, only the women and the children and the animals and all that's in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as booty for yourself, and you shall use the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. So they're to spare the women and children. This idea that he kills everything is just ridiculous. Now then, there is an exception to this in verse 17, that you shall utterly destroy them, the Hivite, the Amorite, I just read this a moment to you, the Canaanite, Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, the Lord has commanded you. You shall utterly destroy them. Now then, primarily, the utterly destroy is to deal with the cities that they were a part of. The cities represented the rulers and the representatives of the Canaanite political and religious system. So totally destroy them. We don't want any aspect of their culture, any aspect of their religion to continue. So remember the context here. The context is so important. It's the judgment of God, and it's to provide the promised land. Now, the judgment of God. Last week we reviewed this book, Stealing from God, and I wanted to read a section. He does a very good job describing this in his section on evil. Frank Turkle, he talks about this context here. He says it's 1400 BC in Canaan. You're in the field tending your crops. At dusk, when the shrieking screams of your infant son send you sprinting towards the village temple. As you approach, the screams shriek higher and higher until pounding drums drown them out. When you burst through the gate, the stench of burning flesh triggers your gag reflex. You stumble through the smoke towards an enormous brass idol with the body of a robust man and the head of a smiling bull. The idol is ablaze as if it were set in the middle of a bonfire, and your son is tied to its scorching, outstretched arms. The leaping flames engulf him and dance into the bull's head, backlighting a sinister smile. Your son is literally being seared to death before your eyes, and you can't get anywhere close to him. No one will help. They all just robotically pound their drums harder so parents won't hear how their children scream when sacrificed to Moloch, the god of the Canaanites. This is a terrible scene. And the Bible talked about even the Israelites at times when they took up some of the Canaanite practices would make their own children walk through the fire. You would think that God would stop such a practice. One of the questions that comes up all the time is, well, if there is a God and he's a good God, then you would think that he would do something about evil. Well, here is a time in the Old Testament when God does something about evil. And what does the skeptic now say? Oh, God is just a genocidal maniac. How could he do this to all these innocent people? Well, they're not innocent people at all. They're doing these detestable things, and God is finally bringing judgment upon them. Now, you need to understand the literary style, too, that's being used. This lethal language that is used especially by Joshua. So, I want to go to Joshua, the 11th chapter, to take a look at this. It says, Then came about when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of it, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Ashaphreth, and to the kings who were of the north in the hill country, and in the Arabah south of Shimeroth, and in the lowland, and on the heights of Dor on the west, to the Canaanite on the east and on the west, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Jebusite in the hill country, and the Hivite at the foot of Hermon in the land of Mizpah. They came out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore, with many horses and chariots. So all these kings, having agreed to meet, came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Now this is really important. The Canaanites took the initiative, not the Israelites. It was the Canaanites that came out to fight. All the people that God said to destroy, they all had come together to fight. Now, in chapter 11, verse 20, it gives the theology behind this. It says, verse 24, it was the Lord to harden their hearts to meet Israel in battle in order that they might be utterly be destroyed, that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Well, the Lord had hardened their hearts, just as he had hardened Pharaoh's heart. How did he harden Pharaoh's heart? Well, he provided opportunities for him to repent over and over again. And each time he rejected one of those offers and opportunities, his heart just became a little bit more hardened. That happened to the Canaanite people. God offered them his mercy over and over and over. He showed them his goodness over and over, but their hearts were hardened. And now when the Israelites are coming to Canaan, they come up to fight against them. Now, I want you to note, how big is their army? Did you remember that when we just read it? What does it say? It says that there were so many in that army, there were like as many as the sand that is on the seashore. As many as were on the sand of the seashore. Somebody figured that out, some mathematician. He said that would be 75 quintillion people. Well, even if it was just the sand of Canaan, it would be billions upon billions of soldiers. I want you to notice something here. There's some exaggeration being used by Joshua. There is some hyperbole. Hyperbole is exaggerating something to make a point. And this is the language of warfare in the East. This is what they put in their literature over and over. And how many are left after the battle? Verse 8. The Lord delivered them into the hand of Israel so that they defeated them and pursued them as far as Great Sidon and Mizrethoth, Mem, and the valley of Mizpin to the east. And they struck them until no survivor was left to them. Everybody was destroyed. It's the language of annihilation. Back in chapter 10, verse 40, thus Joshua struck all the land and the hill country and the Negev and the lowland and the slopes and all their kings. He left no survivor, but he utterly destroyed all that who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. In chapter 11, verse 14, all the spoil of these cities and all the cattle the sons of Israel took as their plunder, and they struck every man with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them. They left no one who breathed. Now, are we to take this literally, or is this part of Joshua's hyperbole? Is this part of his exaggeration? Well, we can go to the book of Judges to get a good answer. Judges chapters 1 through 3 tell us about this, but I'm just going to read chapter 2, verses 1 and following. It says, Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt, and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I said to you, I will drive them out before you. But they will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So they named the place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. Well, Judges tells us that there were still Canaanites in the land. They still were a hindrance to the Israelites. In fact, the books of Samuel and Kings and archaeological evidence shows us that Joshua failed to drive out all the inhabitants of Canaan. So why is this language such that we annihilated them all, nothing left that breathed? It is part of an ancient hyperbole that we read in other ancient literature as well. The Egyptians used this. Everybody in that part of the country who went to war, they all had the same kind of language. David, it says, killed all of the Amalekites, 1 Samuel 15. There were none left. And yet in 1 Samuel 30 and 31, they went out again to kill the Amalekites. Now, if they killed them all back in chapter 15, how is there still some left in chapters 30 and 31? Now, did the Bible contradict itself? No. What you have is hyperbole. You need to understand the styles that the Bible were written in. Ancient literature of the East is full of this kind of language. It was never meant to be taken literally. It was hyperbole. And so oftentimes when you read about some of the things that happened in these actions with Joshua, some of them are just being exaggerated. We killed everybody. And yet in the next few chapters, you read that they're still there. And so this genocidal, total annihilation of these people just did not happen. Now, I'll tell you, my sweet wife, she's sitting right over there. My sweet wife, the other day we were watching a football game, and the other team had the ball, and the guy was going back to pass, and all of a sudden she screamed, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" And I looked at her, "Why are you so violent?" She looked at me like I had lost my marbles. She wasn't violent. She just was rooting and cheering our team on. But let me tell you what, we annihilated them. We massacred them. We slaughtered them. Now, with that kind of language, you would think their bodies left all over the football field. But that's the kind of language we use all of the time to try to emphasize this, what a great victory we had. And that's the same thing they did in the Old Testament. Exaggeration and hyperbole to make a point. If I told you once, I've told you 1,000,000 times not to exaggerate. We were telling jokes the other day, and they were so funny. I laughed my head off. I saw a girl in the mall the other day, and she was wearing a ton of makeup. I don't really like spiders because they make my skin crawl. I have a cousin who is as big as a house. We use this type of hyperbole and this exaggeration all of the time. In the New Testament, it's used as well. In the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew the 5th chapter, verses 24 through 30, Jesus talks about if your right eye offends you, it makes you stumble, then just pluck it out. In the next verse, if your right hand causes you to stumble, then cut it off. Are we to take this literally? I mean, if we were to take this literally, we would all be blind and maimed. But it's hyperbole. It's talking to us about we really need to pay attention to the temptations that come in our life. In Matthew the 23rd chapter, verse 24, Jesus said, "You blind guides who strain out the gnat and yet swallow the camel." Are we to take that literally? That they literally were straining a gnat and a strainer and then they would swallow literally a camel? It's hyperbole. It's like the guy with a log in his eye. One of the ones that's interesting is Mark the 10th chapter, verse 24. It's easier for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. And somebody came up with a story that the eye of a needle was the name of a gate in Jerusalem, and the camel had to crouch down and crawl through this this eye of a needle gate, because it was a low gate. You know what? There has never in the history of Jerusalem been a gate called the Eye of the Needle. Not in the past, not now, not ever. It was a person in the 11th century who was trying to look, how could this be literal? Oh, it must be referring to as some kind of a gate. No, it's hyperbole. It's saying, man, it is really hard for a rich man to get into heaven. It's easier for him to get into heaven than it is for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. A literal needle, a literal camel. How ridiculous is that? We don't take the Bible literally. People ask, do you take the Bible literally? No, it'd be silly to do that. We take it literally. We take it literally. We realize the context in which these things were written and the styles in which the writers were using. Another accusation made against the Old Testament God is that God commanded the people of the Old Testament to kill their own children. And they quote Deuteronomy, the 21st chapter, verses 18 through 21. So let's take a look at that. It says, if any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it and fear. Well, let's look at the context here. In the context in which this was written, in the land around, it was a patriarchal society. That means that the father's word was law. It's the same thing that happened in the days of the Roman Empire. The father's word was law. Whatever the father did, any action the father took was right. And in that kind of atmosphere, whatever the father wanted to do, he could do and get away with it. If his son was causing trouble, he could just get angry, flap the handle, have his son killed. God says, no, wait a minute. You can't just do that anymore. In fact, if you have a stubborn, rebellious son who's a glutton and drunkard, you first have to take the mom with you. You and mom get him, bring him before the elders. Now, first of all, you got to get the mom involved in this. You know how hard that's going to be. Let me tell you, I have 3 sons. I know how hard it would be to get the mom involved. And then you have to get the elders of the city together and tell them exactly what's going on. Do you think it'll ever go that far? Do we ever have an example in the Old Testament of this ever happening? No. However, we do have one example in the New Testament about a son who wished his father were dead. And he wanted the father to give him his portion of the money that would come to him when his father died. And he took that money and spent it on wild living, on prostitutes and drunkenness. And when he came home, what do you think the father did? Did he do what was said here in Deuteronomy? No, what he did was bring him back into the house, and he loved him. And this is the story of the prodigal son in Luke, the 15th chapter. In the Old Testament, we read an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Look what they did. They were so terrible. They would force you to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We don't read that in its context. In its context, it's calling for restraint and proper justice. Because if somebody hit you and broke your tooth, what you do is you turn around and you beat the living daylights out of him. And if you beat the living daylights out of him, then his family is going to come back and they're going to kill you. If they kill you, your family is going to come back and they're going to kill that family. And if you kill that family, that clan is going to come and fight your clan. And all of a sudden things are going to get out of control. He says, that's not going to happen. It'll be an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Use proper justice. Use restraint. Now, there are so many other things in the Old Testament like this. Slavery is brought up over and over, the slavery of the Old Testament. And I wish I had time to talk about that. I've talked about that recently in some sermons that I've given. I went through 1 Timothy and talked about it then. Talked about it when we went through 1 Peter recently. It's just not like they're describing it. It's not like we think about it as Civil War era slavery. There are accusations just being made that are just not right and not fair. So what's the points we should take from this? The first point is, don't let godless, immoral, atheist skeptics teach you the Bible. They twist it like they do the rest of their life. They don't get it right to start with. Why would you listen to them? And second thing you need to do is learn how to read the Bible. Learn hermeneutics. That's a big word. Hermeneutics just means the science of interpreting Scripture. We do this with every other book we read, but somehow we don't do that with the Bible. I have a new book. I thought about doing a review of this, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, by Gordon Fee, and another fellow. It's too complicated to have a review of it, most likely. But I haven't got to read the whole thing either. But I started at, and he really looks at all the different styles and all the different aspects of the Bible. And we'll talk about this some more later, because the Bible's just not one book. Of course, it's 40 books, 66 books rather, and 40 different authors written over a period of 1,600 years. There's so much involved here. We need to know about that. But I want you to have your faith fortified. I want you to know that all this baloney you've been hearing from new atheists and from skeptics and doubters, it's just not true. Now, there are some things in the Old Testament, I'll tell you, that are difficult to understand. That's right, they're difficult to understand. But most of these accusations are groundless. And most of the things even that are hard to understand, there's an explanation for them. And so be careful. Don't buy into all the skeptics thing. And if there's somebody you know personally, just ask them, what do you mean by that? Let them explain it to you. How'd you come to that conclusion? Because that's not what I read in my Bible. And anyway, I hope it'll strengthen your faith. Learn how to read the Bible. Understand what it's all about. We'll come back and talk about this at a future time. Well, it's been good visiting with you. I hope you're all doing okay. All this stuff going on, I hope we're getting closer and closer to the end of all this isolation, and all this COVID stuff will be over and behind us sometime soon. I hope you're doing okay, and may God give you the strength, and may God watch over you. I look forward to seeing you Sunday in worship. May God bless you all.